Hello and welcome to the Leadership Learned podcast, brought to you by IDG, the leadership specialists. Each episode we examine the behaviours, skills and attributes required to improve human performance through effective leadership. We discuss the latest thinking and issues affecting leadership from the classroom to the boardroom to provide tangible insights as we go beyond the clichés to prove that leaders are made, not born. In this episode, we are talking about leadership in schools and why it's important for young people to be taught leadership skills and behaviours in order to prepare them for the world of work. Just 1 in 3 business leaders think schools are doing enough to equip pupils with skills for work. PSHE, which stands for Personal, Social, Health and Economic Education, is the area of the school curriculum which focuses on the world of work, but it is not a statutory part. However, 85% of business leaders, 90% of parents and 92% of young people think that it should be. So where do leadership skills fit into this? Well, at IDG we've been teaching leadership for over 22 years, and in the last couple of years it's been interesting to see the need grow for teaching leadership behaviours to young adults and school children. In fact, for the last 2 years we've partnered with the school to make leadership a part of the curriculum, and it's become obvious the benefits that their students are getting from learning these skills and applying them in today's world. So today we're going to talk about why we think it's important to give schools the opportunity to teach leadership skills and how this will benefit businesses in the future. I'm Matthew Moore, I'm your host, and I'm joined again by Dr. Rona McKenzie, an experienced leader in both education and business, who has been a college principal, a COO, chair of the Institute of Directors and much more, and leadership guru Nigel Girling, who has been a CEO of multiple organisations and a member of a government task force on leadership. I started the conversation by asking Rona to talk about what led us to the realisation that leadership is a relevant education topic for young people.
IDG had to ask themselves the big questions. Can we teach leadership? Well, yeah, we know we can. Should we be teaching it to children, and should we be teaching it to them now? And of course, some people's understanding of leadership and what that means might make them question us actually doing that. But of course, we know the IDG way of delivering leadership is through 3 lenses. So leaders are not just leaders, they're leading, they're following their colleagues, their peers, the team, and they're also partnering with people within their team and across the organisation or the school or whatever the entity is. And when you look through those 3 lenses, we know that to be an effective person working with anybody else, we need to be able to lead, follow and partner. And the skills required to do that well are they're multifaceted and complex. They also, our ability to perform them will change depending on time and mood and pressure, context, the people around us. So we know at IDG that leadership doesn't have an end goal, a gold standard. We would never say, oh, I'm done now in my leadership development. Thank you very much. I put my gold star on and off I go. We know that we will be developing as leaders for our entire lives, particularly with the way the world is changing so much. And so we know that it's important to engage as early as we can in understanding what it means to lead and what it looks like and feels like, and who we are in the world, how we lead and behave, so that we can then iteratively develop over time to be the best versions of us as we go.
So in a lot of ways, it's about preparing for the workplace.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost about preparing us for life, because we give responsibility of leadership to primary school age students. We make form captains and sports captains and all sorts of different responsibilities. But we don't have the chance, we don't have the time in education to stop and teach those important skills that are required. So actually, we tend to give leadership roles to young children because they show themselves in some way to be a natural leader, a little bit more confident, or they might be the September babies who've been kicking around for a bit longer than some of the others, and they've found their feet and they found their voice and they're ready to take a little bit of responsibility. So we give them that chance and then we let them crack on with it. And what typically happens, because in schools of the pressure of time and other activities, if something goes well, brilliant, they carry on. If something goes wrong, we teachers tend to solve it for them and take that pain away, rather than giving them the opportunity to be able to develop the skills of reflection which I would argue is the most important thing we should be learning at school. Who am I? What do I look like to me? And what do I look like to other people? What's it like to be with me? And which bits of me are really great and I'm proud of, and actually which bits of me for some people are less palatable. I'm very confident and some people find that a little bit, too much. Okay, how might I adapt and flex? And if we can be learning about ourselves and our place in the world and how we show up when we're younger, I feel that some of the pain that particularly teenagers go through would be lessened, because they would have a much better understanding of who they are in the world and where they fit. Now, at the minute, the government is hung up on inspection regimes which measure predominantly the amount you progress from a point when you did an exam when you were 11 through to when you're 16 and 18, and how much you go to school in terms of attending, not engagement, but attendance. And so schools are hamstrung with our children need to get their exam results at the standard that's expected by the government, and they need to show up. We're not considering, therefore, in this world that we don't recognize post-pandemic, with the multitude of changes that have gone on with the rise of AI and ChatGPT and everything that's going on out there. What we're not doing now in many schools is we don't have the ability, the flexibility, the capacity to say to government, actually, maybe we're doing this wrong, because all of these young people need to learn to lead and follow and partner. They all need to know themselves. They need to be reflective and curious. They need to understand the world around them to the best of their ability and know how to access information and decide what's meaningful and useful and genuine and authentic, and then act accordingly. But our schools are stuck in a place where they are governed by rules that mean that they can't throw away those shackles and be as free as they may choose to be. So we rely on kids and their families giving them opportunities outside of school to learn to lead. And I would argue that that's happening in the wrong place. Why on earth aren't we teaching the art, the science of leadership? Because it's so important. Why don't we teach it explicitly and help and accelerate people up that trajectory, that pathway, so that they enter the world going, I know who I am now, and I know how I show up in the world now. And yes, I do this thing, and some people find it a bit annoying, but I recognize that, and I don't like the detail. I do like the big picture. So I do need to partner with people that love the details, so that together we're stronger. All these things that we learn over time, it's just don't get to experience that. And it feels to me deeply wrong that they don't. And that's why we want to do something different.
Yeah, exactly. You've said a whole bundle there, haven't you? I mean, just that realization of the fact that you are only one piece of a jigsaw is so important, and yet we don't encourage it often. I mean, sometimes good parenting can do it, but unfortunately not every kid gets good parenting, and parents are under probably at least as much, if not more, pressure to get stuff done often than the teachers are in the schools, and nobody's doing it for lots of them. It's just the recognition of the fact that you have particular strengths and you have some things that you're better at than others, and actually partnering with someone who has the other bits is incredibly important, because actually naturally we often don't do that. We go and associate with people that are just like us.
Exactly.
You end up with loads and loads of autocrats joining together and forming some kind of fighting force, and loads of other ones who like to serve being meek and mild and stuck in the corner, because the meek shall inherit the earth. There's all these kinds of things that push people into joining into these homogenous groups, when actually a heterogeneous group would be much more important and more powerful. But it's got to be created. It doesn't naturally occur necessarily. I was fortunate at the age of, 10 or 11, that my parents made me join the Cubs, which led me to then naturally follow into the Scouts. And I was a sixer in the Cubs with my special woggle, which was a different color to everybody else's woggle. And I was very proud of it. And then I became an assistant patrol leader, then a patrol leader, then I became a venture scout and a venture scout leader. And all the time I was learning leadership skills, and I had no idea that's what was happening.
It's interesting what you say, Nigel. I was in the guides. We got opportunity to learn outside of school in our communities with other children of different ages, of course, because guides and scouts are mixed age ranges rather than just being stuck with the kids who are the same age as you. And so we were fortunate to have that experience. There are so many children who don't get those opportunities for a multitude of reasons. But every child gets to go to school. I should say the majority of children gets to go to school in the UK. I was at the High Performance Learning Conference a couple of Fridays ago and did a presentation with a colleague, Ryan, around why we teach leadership in schools and why we believe more schools should be engaging with experts in leadership to develop the skills and capacities in their staff and in their students. Because, of course, if we just focus on the kids and we help them develop, they might actually overtake the teachers and be better. And so we need to make sure the playing field is kind of level in that sense. But I was talking about my first experience as a leader at primary school. I was captain of the sports team, the athletics team, and we won. And there's a picture of me with my class buddy Alex holding up the cup, and we'd won the competition. Now, what that doesn't, it does show that I was organised and I corralled my colleague, my peers, and I made sure they got the right kit and they were turned up at the right time and all of those organisational things. But what it doesn't show is that two things. Firstly, there was some conflict in that team, and as an only child of parents who don't argue, have never argued, always discuss, I had no idea how to cope with conflict. So the teacher had to just solve that for me. Teacher didn't have time to teach me. It's a highly complicated thing to engage with. And she didn't necessarily understand my upbringing and the fact that raised voices and disagreement don't exist in my life. And also the little boy who was holding the cup up with me bullied me really badly.
Wow.
Because he thought that I was different, sporty, and I was a girl, and that wasn't necessarily the right thing. And I was quiet and I was a little bit shy and anxious of upsetting other people. And so he capitalized on that and made my life hell at primary school. And that picture, so it shows Rona, the leader, who led the sports the athletics team to success. And what it doesn't show is the trauma that I ensued. And actually a recurring theme through my life has always been shying away from direct conflict unless I genuinely feel there's a value and a purpose to engaging in discussion about a problem. If someone argues back with me, I'm stuck. I can't listen to politicians argue because it puts me into freeze. It just feels so alien. And that when you become a lead, I set up a school and you lead a school. Of course, school's riddled with conflict. That's what life is. And it's something that drains my energy very quickly. And I'm 48 now, and I'd say in the last 5 to 8 years is the time I've truly learned to be comfortable with the uncomfortableness of being in disagreement. And not calling it conflict, but calling it disagreement, and understanding that we have different maps of the world. We see the world in different ways. And so naturally there will be disagreement. And we just need to take time to understand one another and listen and learn and find ways of seeking resolution or agreement. Now, if some of the people who like to argue and shout and push their point learned that, they might dial some of that down. And if the quiet, shy and avoidance of conflict or disagreement knew that, they might dial up some of the skills they need. But of course, I never got to learn that in schools, and many of our kids aren't learning it now and won't. And this will affect their relationships in school with their peers and their teachers, the relationships they have in their private and personal lives, how they navigate changes and transitions from school to work or university, as they move homes and lose family members and gain family members, all of the things they become parents or not. Everything that we require to lead and follow and partner is used in everyday life with all of the people we encounter. So it seems like it's as basic as learning to read and write is to learn these other 3 skills. So it just feels to me like it makes complete sense.
Yeah, it does. And to leave people to just busk their way through such fundamental stuff and everyone else to suffer the consequences and them to suffer the consequences just seems like a dereliction of duty. Actually, I think it's not just a mistake, it's an abdication of responsibility to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
So we need to rejig our priorities in life in order to address some of that stuff, don't we?
I suppose what could be said is why are those skills not the ones that people naturally learn in their social groups, in the social setups in schools and in their friends and families and everything? Is that not something that they naturally sort of pick up along the way?
I think we learn our way of doing things. We don't necessarily learn what we look like, what it looks like to be with us and to be on the receiving end of us. And I don't think we learn that there are alternative behaviors. So as a teacher, I might see a class for a couple of hours a week, and I see them every week for the year, and then I might not see them again. As a student, I might have, 15, 20 teachers that see me in a week. And so they see a snapshot of me in a class of 30. They get me to work in partnership with whoever I'm sat next to. And I probably pick this person because we get on all right.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they've moved someone who was misbehaving and I'm stuck with this person that I'm now next to because I'm the good kid. And this is the one that's a little bit naughty or noisy. And now I've got to work with you. And so we end up being forced into groups and pairs. And it's quite linear. We don't get lots of different interaction necessarily. But of course, when those things work and don't work, what as teachers we tend to do is we create the scenarios which we know will be effective. We definitely don't put people in groups who we know won't work well together, because we'll be shooting ourselves in the foot. I've got you for an hour. I need to teach you these concepts and I want you to learn in the most engaging way. So I need to set you up for success. Work with these kids. I know you'll get on. I know that you're good at this skill and you're good at that. I'll put you together. But I don't necessarily explicitly say to you why I'm doing these things. Or help you to develop the things you're not very good at. So we tend to say to kids, shush and listen. We don't tell them how to listen. We don't tell them there's different ways to listen. Some teachers do, and I'm doing them a disservice. Some teachers do, but the time to explicitly teach that and practice it and reflect on it and catch ourselves getting better at it, that's the bit that gets missed.
So it's not just about teaching these skills to children, but it's the way children are generally taught as well.
Yeah, there's some amazing teachers out there who are naturally weaving into their lessons the opportunity to teach kids that when they're actively listening, this is what it looks like, and they will be catching the students doing it well and pointing it out to their peers. And so they are raising awareness of these skills and their importance and how to practice them. But I would argue that they're the exception, not the norm, because typically teachers are under such phenomenal pressure to be teaching not just their curriculum, but all the other things that the government adds in. And it used to be a bit of a standing joke. I mean, I spent 20 years in schools, and every year the government would come up with something else we'd need to teach. And we'd be saying, us as well? That new thing too? Where are we going to fit that in? And it gets layered on and on and on. And it becomes so much, there's just so much to do. So it's understandable that there isn't time and space at the moment in the current context of what we have to teach in schools. So yeah, there are many teachers who just don't have time or don't have the awareness themselves, because of course, as an adult, there'll be things I still don't know about myself that you see every day and I'm not aware of. And so I can't possibly keep developing as a leader unless someone points those things out to me and helps me to grow. Well, in teaching, they're already working phenomenal hours. They've not got the time to engage with that type of self-development that's, I would argue, is absolutely vital. So it feels like there's a time to shift the narrative away from it's all about teaching a subject, and it's more about thinking around the skills we need for life now.
Yes, I mean, it must feel incredibly galling to people who are teachers, being told they ought to engage in reflective practice when any possibility of that has been ironed out of their life by the myriad of chores and responsibilities that they've had to take on.
What I love is, I mean, Tom Sheraton's done some amazing work looking at how we can teach effectively in the classroom, looking at patterns of activity and behavior that really drives learning and engages students in metacognition, really effective questioning and critical thinking. And it's phenomenal work. And when I read the posts that teachers write in response to his work, it just fills you with absolute pleasure, because you realize that there are people out there doing amazing things in our classrooms and could be doing more. And so I guess there's two elements to this now. It's about saying teachers can't do everything, but we at IDG are helping schools to look at how they embed leadership in the curriculum. So it's not an hour of leadership a week. It's how do we use leadership and teach it through the medium of a language or a science or a humanities subject. But also, where else in the world is there the opportunity to explicitly teach leadership? So we see, when we watch football, we see in the Premiership some phenomenal leadership exhibited on the pitch and within the teams. And I'm sure that they will be teaching the art of leadership and followership at that level. Are we teaching it at grassroots football? I don't know. Possibly not, because the people who are delivering grassroots football maybe haven't had that opportunity to learn themselves. So this isn't just about what do we do in schools, but across our communities, how do we help everybody to develop leadership skills so that they can pass that on? Now, of course, because the only place everyone goes is school, that would make sense to start there, so that then that kind of proliferates out into communities as these children become older and older.
So you've talked a little bit there about how we actually go about it, and it's not just about teaching the skills to the children; it's about teaching the teachers how to create the right atmosphere to develop these leadership skills as well. But what are the barriers to teaching leadership to young adults and children?
Going back to your previous question before we move on to this bit, then, because I'm afraid my mouth will heal up because I was quiet for several seconds. That you said, don't they learn this stuff through their social groups, etc.? I would suggest the evidence suggests not, because if that worked, we'd have a hell of a lot more people that had acquired these skills and this understanding, this awareness through life than we appear to have got. It's not natural. We see it's not naturally occurring. And also, I suspect that the way social interaction has changed in recent years makes that probably even less likely, that actually a lot of what they learn is toxic behavior and appalling followership and partner sharing skills. And I can't even imagine what it must be like to be a 13-year-old getting bullied online, where you can never escape.
Yeah, when we think about followership, when we look at many young people who they're following on social media, they're not necessarily seeing the whole person on social media. They're seeing an aspect of the sculptured and created part of that person. They're not seeing the complexity of their life, the bits that aren't as good as, or they're not as comfortable with, or not as confident with. And so that young people can get a perception today of lots of perfectly created people living wonderful, happy, blissful lives, and wish that they had that, or have a desire to live that life. And therefore what they're following isn't reality. It's not authentic truth. It's a created picture. And so in some ways, it's about helping young people to examine who they are and look around them and talk about values and qualities. What do I really value in my life, and who am I? What do I enjoy? What do I like doing? What makes me happy? I always say, when I run leadership programs for the big kids, the adults, what's your happy place? What makes you tick? If you could be anywhere now, what would you be doing? And we suddenly start to see what people value. Is it family or friends or activity or whatever it might be? And then if you dig into that, why do we value it? What is it about that activity? Well, we tend to find out that people like to serve others. It's why they became a teacher or a nurse. It's that they like to develop others, or whatever it might be. We start to look at qualities and values. And if young people were able to think about those things, then I think it would do a couple of things. It might help them look a bit more critically at the world around them and ask themselves, what are they not seeing? What is the reality? But also, when they think about leaving school and entering the big scary world, it might help them to decide what they go and do next. Because quite often we make our decisions in life based on what we think we should do, or what we perceive something to be that we're attracted to, rather than saying, what are my core values? What do I need? If I think back to when I went to uni, I went to a college, as was then. I went to PE college. I went to lots of different universities. I was at Warwick for the HPL conference, and I went to interview at Warwick. And I didn't go there because it was big and it felt quite unfriendly and cold to me. I needed somewhere little and cozy with lots of people that made me feel like I was at home. Now, I don't think I actually consciously made that decision. I just said at the time, I don't feel safe here. I don't feel like I fit, but I think I fit over there in Bedford, so I'll go there. Now, would have been really helpful for someone to say to me, let's unpick why you don't feel like you fit. What is that? Tell me about that. And some of that was about confidence. Some of it was about I knew I wasn't going to do very well in my A levels, and I didn't want to be with a bunch of really bright kids because I would probably feel like I wasn't very clever and I didn't fit in, or I didn't deserve to be there. Well, there was a whole lot of work that could have been done then to help me lead myself better and follow and partner and lead others. So yeah, there's lots of potential there to be doing work with young people to really help them see themselves and the world around them with it through different lenses and with kind of a clearer picture.
I mean, absolutely, that all resonates with me. And I think for a lot of young people, and so this was true for me, everything you do and say actually is basically a different version of, am I all right? Am I good enough? Am I acceptable? See, so many of the things you do or affiliate with or join in with or things like that are ways of saying to yourself, am I all right? And social media just constantly shows kids that they're not good enough. So, and there's so many things that happen around young people that are aspirational. Marketing and advertising has a huge toxic influence in a lot of this stuff, constantly peddling things to people that suggest to them that they're not okay yet, but they will be if they give these people more of their money. And it's just, there's this kind of fury of madness of pretending that's going on in the world today, and not just in the UK. I think there are plenty of places where that happens more. And leadership, if it encourages you to stand back from things, Roni, you said something in a previous podcast about when you receive any kind of feedback or criticism, holding it out in front of you. I think holding the world out in front of you is a very smart thing to do, and examining it through a critical thinking lens, through objectively evaluating it in some way. And if we can help young people to do that, and if we can help teachers to help young people to do that, we'd be doing the world a great service.
If we look at things like history lessons where they're looking at, I live in a house where we see American news, Canadian news, English news, Danish news. And so what we see is the world viewed through very different lenses. And we know that in history, they will be teaching the critical thinking and looking from the different positions of different people involved in conflict. So we know it's being taught there, but it's about making that transition from learning something like that in history and applying that skill to ourselves. So what was interesting is every time I run leadership programs with the big kids, they're surprised at the amount of time we devote to debrief and reflection, because it's not something we naturally do in business. We don't end a meeting and then say, okay, in that meeting, what went well? What would we do differently next time? We just don't do that. And we should, because that's how we learn and how we improve our process and how we get to know one another better, because then I hear what you think was good compared to what I thought, and that can change my perspective. And also when I was working, when we were at the HPL conference, we ran a workshop and we asked people to pick so this tracks back to a young student in a school who's doing a higher project qualification in leadership. And his question is it okay to be me? As an embryonic leader today, is it okay to be me? So he's asking himself, who am I the leader of today, and where do I sit in my leadership world? And I asked the delegates to do that. These are head teachers, senior leaders of schools from around the world, to do the same thing, to pick an artifact that represented them, to place it on a Perspex cake stand in a place that resonated for them, and then explain who they are and why they're there. And what came out of their mouths was really phenomenal and surprised them. And they heard themselves saying, I feel like the swan because everyone looks like I'm gliding along and underneath the legs are kicking, and I'm on this level and I'm on my own and I'm isolated and I don't know who to turn to for support, and And so suddenly they were gaining a greater sense of awareness of how they feel. And when you verbalize it and you say it out loud, it does a few things. It allows you to hear your own voice and realize how you feel. And that brings a whole other level of understanding. It gives you the opportunity to share some vulnerability, which many people find very difficult. So creating a safe space to allow them to do that requires skill, but can be done very quickly. But then giving people the space and the security to be vulnerable and be honest, and then not leaving them hanging because the bell's gone and we're off to break time, and saying, now that you've shared this with me, so what do you want to have happen now? And that's when often people will say, I need this and I need that, and I'm going to do this. And they don't necessarily need you to do anything, but they needed the opportunity to think through how they feel. If we put that back into working with young people and did the same thing, who are you today and how does it feel to be you? We start to help them to see where their vulnerabilities are and where they feel less comfortable and secure and confident, and what do they need and what might they choose to do in little tiny steps, so that as the days and weeks pass through school, they are learning more about themselves and also kind of tooling themselves up with ways of adapting and trying things on for size to see what it feels like if I dial up a little bit of confidence, or I say a little bit less and listen more, or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's in the nuance and the kind of gentleness of exploring leadership where I think you can add the most value for young people.
Absolutely. And that stuff will resonate forever for people. Once you've had that kind of an epiphany at a young age, it will never leave you. You'll forget about it for a while, but it will never leave you. It'll come back in different contexts and different circumstances, and you'll go back to how that felt, what was good or bad about it. You see the whole drama triangle thing playing out in schools and families all the time, where somebody's either the persecutor, the abuser, or the victim or the rescuer, and people naturally tend to kind of gravitate towards one of those roles, and it often tells you so much about their own insecurities and uncertainties. From your days in schools, how often bullies are actually acting out their own insecurities. And that's their way of dealing with it, is to attack, whereas other people retreat into their shells and become withdrawn and depressed about it and become a victim, and other people feel like they've got to be some superhero and go swoop in and rescue everybody. And it's called a drama triangle because those things are all dramatic roles that aren't real.
And as a teacher, we learn, some teachers will learn the art of teaching in 12 months. So clearly much of that is around how we facilitate the learning of information, so on. It's not necessarily around the child psychology, the behavioral psychology that you're describing there, and the interactions between individuals and groups. And we tend to learn that. I was a deputy head of year in my second year of teaching, so I was a young 23-year-old with, we had a year group at year 7s. I was deputy head and lots of little impressionable 11 and 12-year-olds. I was suddenly learning as an only child, having never seen this kind of interaction play out. Suddenly I was like, crikey, kids are different, really different, and they do what I think are weird things. I don't really know why you need to do X or Y, because it's not in my experience, and I can't possibly understand it without witnessing it and seeing it. So there's a big role there in terms of understanding psychology and behaviors and interactions, which I think through the lens of leadership, fellowship, partnership, we can learn. We don't necessarily need to learn the psychology side first. We can learn it and apply it in different ways.
My educational background as a leader was in further education and higher education. And it gets worse, because in further and higher education, you don't have to be qualified to be a teacher at all. Quite often, you only have to have knowledge in your subject area. So you've seen so many people in those kind of environments who aren't actually vaguely interested in whether their students or pupils are learning anything. They like their subject. If anything, they find the students very annoying, and an irritation gets in the way of them loving their subject. And progress in higher education is often doing less and less teaching. So the goal is to do less hours of teaching and less contact time. And as you progress, you can do more research. So you can spend more time thinking about the subject that you like, and less time with these annoying people that want stuff. It's just a bizarre paradigm that we've created, where the higher level somebody goes in education or in their leadership career, the less involvement with people they're supposed to have. Like it's a reward.
Well, it is that classic in schools where you're a very effective teacher, and so you typically then become a deputy head or a head of department, and you're moved away from the art of teaching to the art of managing and leading. And so we lose the great teachers. And the government did the right thing in that they created an opportunity to pay great teachers more to stay in the classroom and not feel the need to have to become a leader to progress through the ladder and so on. And clever schools have created opportunities for leading teaching to be one of the most important things, so that as an expert teacher, you become the leader of other teachers and through the art of teaching. But yeah, quite often we just get promoted with no leadership understanding or awareness. And that's why at ODG we see so many people throughout their careers coming to us for training. And I'm constantly amazed at the things they don't know. And then I think to myself, why am I amazed? Because of course they don't know, because they'll have never taught it.
Yeah. And if you were learning that stuff by osmosis almost at the age of sort of 13, 14, 15, 16, that wouldn't happen.
No.
Because people would all have a baseline of general awareness and understanding of some of these things, which goes back to your first question. That's why we need to be teaching it in schools.
And also what we tend to find is some of these big leadership positions that have an impact on so many of us are filled with people who are actually confident and articulate and not necessarily skilled expert leaders and partners with others. And so if you Google crisis of leadership, which I did before the conference to look for some headlines, we see lots of politicians, people who have been to prestigious universities and are confident and articulate and can argue really, really well. Does that make them the right people to be leading our countries? I would argue not necessarily. Yet we still see some exceptional leaders who typically come from very different backgrounds. If we think of the leaders that we admire today in different parts of the world, they've had a past which wouldn't have put them on the trajectory of becoming president of a country. Yet the leadership skills they've developed over time mean that they've got that subtlety and nuance and understanding of others and awareness of difference. And so they can put them into play much more effectively. So if we developed young people's leadership capacity, I feel like the pool of people from which we have to select the leaders in those really important roles would be greater. And I would argue we'd get much better range of candidates. And who knows where we might be if we'd got better leaders at the top.
Exactly that.
I suppose the other thing that comes up is how is the quality of the teaching measured? Because obviously in a lot of the traditional subjects, the students will then end up taking an exam and get a pass or a fail. But this isn't something that you're going to want someone to have a pass or fail at, is it? No. So how can it be measured?
Yeah, I'm doing that's piece of work I'm doing at the minute, which I find really interesting. Partly because I'm curious and it makes my head hurt a lot. And so I figure that if stuff really makes your head hurt, it's the good stuff. But because leadership's got no gold standard top marks, there's no destination. I kind of see it as if all of the skills we need to be a leader are on different ladders, and we walk up and down the rungs of the ladder. And depending how skilled we are, our ladder might be longer or shorter. And depending how able we are to dial up and down those skills, we might be able to run up and down our ladder a bit quicker. So, of course, what we're trying to do is make sure we've got a full suite of ladders. And we know over the years that the skills and qualities and behaviours that we require to lead are becoming more nuanced and so developing. So over the years, I would imagine we'll need more and more ladders, and we'll need them to be different lengths. But we also want to be able to pick up our ladder and put it in lots of different contexts. So I'm under no pressure versus I'm under extreme pressure. I'm working with a familiar team versus I'm working with people I've never met. So we can take our suite of skills and adopt them in different times and places with different people. And of course, we now know that we've always known that the world keeps changing, but I think we're more aware now than ever before as to how quickly our world is changing. So the context within which we understand today, we can't predict what they'll look like in 10 or 20 years. So the kids in schools now are going to be leading in situations which will blow our minds. And so we need to be able to help them to use those skills in a really agile way and keep iterating and developing constantly, which requires constant reflection, so that in 50 years, when we're not here, and the 10-year-olds in schools are at the ends of their leadership careers, they will have a far greater capacity than we could ever have dreamt of, and are teaching the next generations. So yeah, I feel like it's we need to get comfortable with not having an answer or a goal, and that flies in the face of how schools are measured, because it's all about exam results and attendance and achievement and trajectory, the hard stuff. And there is some inspection of how kids feel. They feel safe, they feel secure, and so on. But I would argue, how deeply were we invited to think about that and interrogate that? I mean, I can wake up in the morning and say I had a rubbish night's sleep, and then I'll look at the metrics on my watch, which is very sophisticated, and it'll tell me, well, you think you had a rubbish night's sleep, but let's have a look at how much light sleep or how much REM or what did you eat last night. And it's so complicated. But I can wake up with a gut feeling I didn't sleep very well. Kids might walk in school and say, I've had or walk out of school. You say to your kids when they get in the car, did you have a good day? No, it was all right.
Yeah.
Okay. And parents are saying, oh, what made it good? And trying to drag some information out of them. But when was the opportunity to say, why was it good? Why was it not so good? And equally then, as a leader, why did that experience go well? What didn't feel good? What didn't feel comfortable? What did they think? And. It's so complex. There's no space for that. No space in measurements and no space in time. So
it goes back to that thing that we spoke about before, this idea of an arithmocracy, that somehow something is only worthwhile if it's got some numbers attached to it. And a lot of what drives these regimes is the ability to show something on a chart. That if you've got a histogram and you can show this one's better than that one, then you kind of, we've done something useful then. But anyone who studies this stuff knows that the highest quality of information is qualitative, not quantitative. And it's behavioral. It's not just outcome. So, but it's too hard to show that on a pie chart or a histogram. So therefore we don't bother with that, and we just go back to exam results because it's easier.
And that's the bit we're grappling with now. So we're delivering leadership in schools, and in a particular school, we're looking at the impact that we're having. And currently we've got a suite of tools that we're using to gain information in lots of different ways. So anecdotal information, self-reflection, 360 feedback, and then some really hard metrics on what behaviors are we seeing in certain circumstances that we create, which are explicitly shared with students so they know they're stepping into a particular role, and then they try it on for size and see what it feels like to lead in this way. And then afterwards they must take the jumper off and go, okay, that was the leadership jumper I put on today and it felt like this, and the other kids thinks it looked like this and felt like this for them, and okay, what do I like about that I want to carry on with, and what do I not want to do or do differently? And so all of that nuance, that's we want to be able to measure that as best we can. And that's not simple, but it'd be good fun grappling with it along the way.
It's been a really interesting discussion, and it made me think, I wonder if we were designing an education system now from scratch, would it look anything like the education system we actually have? And
I doubt it,
because what we'd want, what you ideally want, is to release children from schools and say to them, right, this is you, this is what you're good at, this is what you need, this is what you're interested in, this is what this is where you need to go, this is the path that you should go on, as opposed to you got a pass in Latin.
There are some phenomenal schools in the world who are doing exactly this, and they're in the handfuls rather than the majority, but they tend to be project-based schools where they're not teaching subjects in silos in hours, but they're combining subjects around common themes. They're schools where the flow of the day is more student focused and led rather than necessarily teacher. The teacher is kind of the guide on the side, the facilitator of learning rather than the teacher of, and students are taking that responsibility, making the link, solving some big, wicked, complex problems in their own ways, and along the way are trying to negotiate with, well, who do I need to work with, who do I need to talk to, what information do I need, where do I find it, how do I know it's real and authentic and accurate? So they are they're being facilitated along the journey of, and actually what they tend to find is when those students do sit exams at the end, they do very well, not because they sat and learned in silos, but because they had the freedom to explore. And so we know it's happening, that focus of who am I in my group, and working, of course, with children of different ages, not just kids my own age, because it must be, if we reflect back, it must be quite a shock to leave school at 16 and then go into work with people from 16 to 65 or 70 or whatever it is. I suddenly don't understand these people. They don't look at the world like me. And we do that now. We deliver courses to leaders in business and tell them what the 21, 22, 23-year-olds look like now, and how they access information and what they expect and are used to, and remind ourselves that they've always had mobile phones and the internet at their fingertips and all those things. So, of course, to leave school at 16 and suddenly be with the people older than us that look so different to us, much more helpful to work in mixed age ranges when we're at school, where we can, in order to develop our understanding of others. So, yeah, we know it's happening. I'd love to see the government in the UK take this on in a very different way and reconsider education. And I doubt they will. But we will do our part. We'll play our part in seeing what we can do to influence that.
It is. I mean, it is obviously a massive topic, and it's not as easy as just saying, let's change the entire education system. But when you do put it in that context, it makes perfect sense for leadership development to be within it as well.
Totally.
Yeah, and we have an education system designed in an industrial age, and we live in an information and human age. So it's bound not to fit. Yeah, and it wasn't designed to do this. It was designed to do something else, to produce labor for our factories and that kind of stuff. That's not where we live anymore. But it hasn't caught up, and it's always going to lack. But maybe the work we're doing can kind of push some of that along a bit quicker.
Let's hope so. Well, we're just about out of time, which is a shame, because I've been really enjoyed that conversation today. It's very interesting and entirely relevant, and I'm sure it's something that we'll come back to time and time again. Just remains for me to say thank you to Rona and Nigel for your time today, and thank you to you for listening. We really would like to hear your opinions on these subjects, so if you do have something to contribute to the discussion, we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the topics discussed today. You can find us on LinkedIn by searching Inspirational Development Group, or email us on info@inspirationaldg.com. If you would like to learn more about IDG and the work we do optimising human performance through leadership development, you can find us at inspirationaldevelopment.com.